Hello, so I'm going to make a video talking about probably epistemology and belief, I guess, which are a bit of the same things because knowledge is sort of like the belief. If we believe something, then we think we know it. But I'm going to talk more specifically about the a priori framework of which we use to, I guess, determine our beliefs or determine the things that we accept to be true, which is essentially a belief. So an a priori framework is necessary. It's like the framework we use to interpret the world. And I guess you could see these on a large scale within paradigms. So a paradigm is like a widely accepted a priori framework. So for example, we could have a scientific paradigm, which would be the idea that everything, including consciousness and everything that exists, can be reduced down to a material substrate. As Thomas Hobbes said, all that is not matter is nothing and hence nowhere, which essentially means that everything that's in existence is material and anything that is not material is not in existence, therefore that anything that we think is not material is actually material or it doesn't exist. So that's essentially a scientific paradigm, and this is shared by many people in the 21st century, and I'd say pushing back to the 20th century as well, which is when I guess this type of thinking really came to light, but I'd say it would go back even further, maybe to the 16th and 17th century with the start of the Renaissance. So that's a scientific paradigm, the idea that everything is matter. But then again, you've got a different kind of scientific paradigm because you can have scientifically minded people who are actually also religious. So they believe that are uncomfortable in collectivizing people in this sort of way because I don't know what all religious scientific people think. But they may believe that there is a lot of truth in the material world, in analysing the material world, and we can find truth through empirical observation and through experimentation. But they may also think that there is a truth beyond that, like maybe some sort of transcendent reality of which is outside of the bounds of science, and maybe atheists might say, well, this is just God of the gaps. It's just that science hasn't become developed enough yet in order to be able to find out exactly what this thing is of which people are talking about, or maybe and that's assuming that it even exists at all. But there is a group of religious people, such as, well, I'll give one for example, I'll give two. I'd say Jordan Peterson fits into this category, and also Keith Ward. Two religious scientists, we'll call them. I think Keith Ward's still alive. I'm not 100% sure about that, but I'm pretty sure he is. So yeah, so that's like an overlapping paradigm. But so why do paradigms matter? Why do a priori belief systems matter? And I'm going to say that there is an essential part of being human. We have to have a framework of which we interpret the world, otherwise we're essentially nothing. Like, it's almost inseparable from us. So we can reject belief. We can have the belief that we reject belief, that there is no belief, that there is no correct belief, therefore we should just believe nothing, which is sort of what I used to revert back into after, I'd say, my a priori framework became dismantled, and I sort of struggled to put it back together, and I won't go into the details of how and why that happened, but it did. And it often leads to extreme nihilism, and nihilism is essentially the belief in nothing, which I was just talking about. But the belief in nothing is still a belief, isn't it? It's a belief that there is nothing to believe. That it's a belief that there is nothing to know for certain, therefore we shouldn't believe anything. But that's almost like a paradox. It's you can't hold that perspective without actually having the belief there in the first place that's what we should think, or that's how we should perceive the world. So and that's sort of the problem with postmodernism as well. Like, postmodernists say that there is no truth, but when you say there is no truth, that's an assertion about the world. That is a truth statement. So you can't say there is no truth without making a truth claim about the world. So we need to accept that there is truth in some ways, but I don't know if there is. But just for the sake of living, I guess, we need to have an a priori framework or a belief system, but then we also need to be critical of our a priori framework. So, for example, when we're analysing ideas or schools of thought, we have to accept the fact that we also have to criticise our own perceptions and accept that other people may come to different conclusions based on their a priori framework. And that doesn't necessarily mean that their framework is wrong, it just means that it's different to ours. And maybe it is wrong, maybe ours is wrong. And we do have to take that into account, but that doesn't necessarily mean chucking everything out just because we think that we can't be certain about our beliefs or that we can't be certain about what we know about the world. And I think a lot of this whole idea of not being certain about the objective world or certain about the world around us probably debatably stems back to Kant, because Kant talked about the noumenal and the phenomenal. So the phenomenal is our experience of the world. It's the idea that we are a conscious being in the world who is interpreting the objects around us through our senses and through our own a priori framework, which is probably going to be the word that I use the most in this video. Quite a nice word, isn't it? A priori or a priori, depending on how you want to say that word. But yeah, he said that we can't know the external world. We can only know our perspective of the external world, and this does make sense. It does make sense to say this, because if you think of a cat or a bat or a fly, you can assume that because they have different sensual organs and because they have a different means of interpreting the world and a different purpose in the world, that they perceive the world, the objective world, in a completely different way to how we perceive it. So, and I think this even differs between humans as well, because not all humans perceive the world in the same way. Now, we might perceive the objects in the same position, if not a very similar position, and we might perceive the colours to be very similar to how the person next to us perceives the same colours, and obviously we can't know this for certain because we can't really describe a colour, but we can assume this. But can we say the same thing about cats? Can we say the same things about bats? And can we say the same thing about snakes? Because different animals can pick up different waves of light and different sound waves that we're not able to pick up, but yet they must still exist objectively. It's just that we don't have the capacity based on our own phenomenology and senses to be able to detect these sorts of things. And is it the case that these things actually exist noumenally, so they exist in and of themselves, or is it just something that's created within the brains of these different species as a means of surviving? And that's quite an interesting thing as well. I think we can confidently say that these things do exist because we can measure them through the means of science. So, for example, we can use certain equipment to pick up ultraviolet light, even though we can't necessarily see it with our naked eye. So I would be confident in saying that it does exist, but it just doesn't necessarily exist in... I don't think we can necessarily see how it exists to other animals, or see the world in the way that other animals see the world. I don't know exactly where I'm going with this, but it's basically the idea that we can't necessarily know the external world, but then again, I believe personally that we can know the external world. It just depends how you define knowledge, and it depends to what extent we can know the external world, because we can sort of know the external world from our own phenomenological perspective, based on our senses and based on empirical observations and experiments, but we can't necessarily know the world as it is, and that's what Kant said, because we can't know the noumenal. And then this idea was sort of picked up by religious people later on, and also atheistic people like postmodernists and Hegel. Hegel was like in a world of his own sort of thing. I don't really know that much about Hegel, but I do know that he posed a similar argument to Kant, or he developed it a bit further, and I don't know if I can actually remember the premises, but I can try and cite the argument. I was trying to write it down the other day, but I don't even know if I got it right in my book. But he said something like, you know what, I'm going to read out what I think it was, and then if it's wrong, then correct me in the comment section, because it probably is wrong, because it's complicated, and I know it's also a problematic argument, so it's not one we can necessarily say to be true. But yes, it's in here somewhere because I was writing about it possibly yesterday. I was writing a lot yesterday as well. So, Postmodernism, Hegel, here it is. Right, so I wrote, Hegel was influenced by Kant. We cannot know the objective world. That's number 1. 2. We can only know our experience of the objective world. Premise 3. We experience the objective world. Conclusion. Therefore, our experience of the objective world is how it really is. That was sort of questionable, and then I wrote another conclusion which I wasn't sure between these two as to which one it was. So our experience or perception of the world is true, which I think it's probably more the second one. So Hegel essentially says, I don't know if I'm mischaracterizing his view, which is probable or possible. So he says that we experience the objective world, therefore our experience of the objective world is true, and we can know the objective world in some ways. But then I also thought, before I came across this argument, I don't know if I wrote it down correctly, that Hegel said that we can't know the objective world. I don't know. I'm going to get confused with arguments, so I'm not going to go too far down that line. And I feel like I've sort of gone off track, but anyway, so I'll jump from Hegel and I'll go straight to postmodernism from Kant. So Kant said we can't know the objective world. Then postmodernists said, well, we can't know the objective world, there is no truth, therefore any perspective or any interpretation of the world around us is correct, because there is nothing that's more true than anything else. So we're all right. But then again, why can't you conclude that we're all wrong? And I guess you can, and that's another problem with postmodernism, I guess. And I think postmodernists, this is a really random video, so it's not what I thought it was going to be. Postmodernists, I feel, also fall into the same problem as the logical positivists with the verification principle. And I know I've talked about this on my channel before. And the verification principle was essentially, it was like it's a means of classifying truth in the world around us or something like that. So it was made up of 3 components, and it was essentially about language. So it was about speaking about the world around us, and my cat just had a little spasm running around. So there was 3 components to it. So and it's about the meaning of words. So the first type of statement is it begins with a T, tautological. Tautology. I can't say the logical part of it. So tautology, or an analytical statement. So this is something like 1 + 1 = 2. All bachelors are unmarried men. So this doesn't necessarily tell us any new information about the world, because it just you can work it out by the means of logic. We don't have to go out into the world and see if all bachelors are unmarried men, or if we can find a bachelor that isn't an unmarried man, which would be like attempting to falsify the statement of all bachelors being unmarried men, because logically speaking, analytically speaking, the definition of a bachelor is an unmarried man, so we can know this without going outside of ourselves and searching for empirical evidence to suggest otherwise. And then we've got synthetic statements. So a synthetic statement is where we make a claim about the objective world, of which we have to test in order to find the validity or truth, or in order to be able to verify, because it's called the verification principle. And verification means we go out there and we try and prove something to be true. So we have to verify these statements. So we go out there and we look to see if it's true. So for example, I could say, my cat is black. Is my cat black? I don't know. And I'm going to have to go out into the world, and I'm going to go have to find my cat. Pretty sure she's down there, and we can go see if she's black. Oh, what do you know? She's black. But then again, is my cat really black, or is that just the way I'm perceiving her to be? Wow. And that's also possible. Anyway, but then you run into more problems with this. So you could say all cats are black. You could go out into the world, you could look for as many cats as you can find, and you find every single cat, and they're black, right? So then you conclude all cats are black. But then again, it's not conclusive, it's not absolute, because you could have missed a cat, There could be a ginger cat living next door who never leaves the house, who you're never going to get a chance to see, and you're stuck with that belief that all cats are black because every cat you've ever seen is black, so you're just making that assumption, and that links to Hume's problem of induction, and that's the idea that we assume that I'm going to use this definition because I always use it, that the events of the past determine the way in which the future is going to be, almost, or we assume that the future is going to be the same as the past, but that's not necessarily the case. Just because we've always experienced something in one way doesn't mean it's always going to be that way. I'm pretty sure my cat's always going to be black. But that's because she always has been black. So there's a problem with that. And then any statement which doesn't fit into these two categories is meaningless. So that would be a meaningless statement, and that's something we can't necessarily determine. So we can't test it, and it's not analytically true or tautologically true. I tried to say that word; it doesn't work. So this would be, according to verificationism, it could be statements about the existence of God. So, for example, we can't scientifically verify the existence of God. We can't go out there and measure the distance of God from the earth, or the size of God, or any of these sorts of things. Therefore, the statement that God exists is meaningless. However, this doesn't really say anything about the objective world, I'm going to retract that statement completely and go down a different line of thinking. So what I was saying at the start about paradigms, it links in with this. It's the idea that only that which is scientifically verifiable is true. Is that correct? Can you verify that statement? No. Can you provide me with empirical proof that only that which is scientifically verifiable is true? No, I don't think you can. I mean, you can try. You can write a big argument down in the comments, and I'll read it, and I'll respond, and I'll say, boom, you did it, or boom, you didn't do it, and then we'll figure out from there, won't we? But I don't think you can do that, and that's a big problem with the verification principle. It fails its own test. Can you prove to me that the verification principle is empirically verifiable? Or can you prove to me that it's analytic? Or is it just meaningless? And the logical positivists' verification principle couldn't withstand this criticism. So what they did was they added a fourth part of the verification principle. And this is where it gets crazy. They say, well, actually, the verification principle is more of just a means of figuring out the world. It's not actually, it's not subject to scrutiny from verificationism. It's separate. It's a theory. It doesn't withstand this. It's different. It's like, okay, well, now you're just sort of like trying to save your own asses, basically. So the verification principle it's not necessarily right. And then obviously later on we got Karl Popper, who comes along with falsification. And I think this is a much better scientific method, because what he says is we should pose a scientific hypothesis and then we should try and look for things that disprove it as opposed to things which prove it. So, for example, if I say all cats are black, we shouldn't go out and look for every single black cat, because when we're looking for black cats, we'll probably just end up ignoring the ones that we don't want to see. And we'll end up verifying our statement as true when it might actually be false. Whereas what we actually should do is go out and look for ginger cats, or go out and look for white cats. And I think the actual analogy which was used was all swans are white. Now, if we lived in certain parts of the world, we might believe this, but in other parts of the world there is actually black swans, and I think these exist in Australia, but I'm not completely sure. So if we didn't live in, say, Australia, it doesn't actually matter as to whether Australia has white swans or black swans. Say we lived in England, we see all white swans, because I'm assuming that all swans in the UK are white, and we never went to Australia, then we would conclusively verify that all swans are white, when in fact we should be going all around the world and looking for black swans and saying, oh, well, maybe all swans aren't actually white, and that would be scientific. That would be how you prove your hypotheses, for example. And that does seem to be how science works. But I guess there's problems with falsification as well, because what if we just never find the contrary evidence to our hypotheses, and we just end up concluding that our hypothesis is in fact true when actually it's not true. It's just that we haven't got the means to be able to find the black swans or find the ginger cats, and that's possible as well. So this is a little bit more of a philosophy video, but I've got like pretty much unlimited recording time on this, so I'm just like rambling on. But it's just about paradigms and knowledge and all these sorts of things, and it's things that I'm interested in thinking about and also interested in talking about and sometimes writing about as well, but I can only go so far with writing before I start to get a little bit like, whoa, there is no truth. It's not really like that, it's just like, oh, what's the point in writing this? Even though there is a point in writing it, because at the time I get into it and then after I just get bored after a little while and stop and start drawing and then might go back to writing. So I'm like halfway through an essay on, I think the question that I devised was, what is the validity of stories within human cultures? And I was actually thinking to 3 years down the line when I'm going to be writing my dissertation for uni, and I haven't even started uni yet, but I'm already thinking about things I want to write about. One of my ideas was so about stories and the validity of them, and maybe even myths as well. Another idea I had was about the thing I was talking about earlier with the relationship between Kant and postmodernism, and how truth sort of became, I guess, decayed, and I could also link that to religion and secularization and things like that, and that could be very interesting. So I'd sort of like to explore ideas like that. I'd also like to look at the significance of art, and I guess just things that make humans human and what distinguishes us from other animals. So I've got a lot of ideas about what I want to write about in it, and yeah, I think it's good to plan early. Anyway, this is 21 minutes long, and I could feel like I could keep on talking, but yeah. So I'll start talking about epistemology, which is knowledge and truth. So we all have an a priori framework or a paradigm, depending on how widespread it is, and then we judge the world based on this, and we have to be careful about accepting complete truth of the paradigms that we have, or the a priori frameworks that we have, and we have to actually criticize our own as well as criticizing others in order to, I guess, get a greater understanding of the noumenal, because we all have little bits of the picture, I believe. A little bit like Hicks' idea of pluralism, in that different religions have different parts of the story, but we almost need to have that Copernican revolution within humanity, except that we don't have the whole truth, or that someone else doesn't have the whole truth, but they might have a little bit of the truth, and maybe we have to all share ideas with each other and have discussions, and then build up, and then eventually we'll be able to build up an actual truthful picture of the world, if that's possible, and everything will be rosy and good. But that's extremely utopian. It's probably not going to happen, and it's probably more likely that World War III will strike first. But maybe we should be a little bit more optimistic about humanity than that. Anyway, that's the end of the video. I'm in a bit of a weird mood today. I've been at work for the majority of the day, and I've been watching Alan Watts, and I was going to talk about Alan Watts, why Jordan Peterson is better than Alan Watts, but that can be another video. And that's not an objective statement, I don't know. I do like them both, but Alan Watts, he makes my head go around sometimes. He made my head go around a lot before. Like, literally, it made me think of circles, like things going in circles, like snakes eating their own tails. I think it's because of the lack of utility of his thoughts, but I don't know. I feel like keeping on talking. But I know I shouldn't, because then, I don't know if people want to watch hour-long videos or 30-minute long videos about me rambling on about philosophical, I'm going to say nonsense, but that's just my perspective of what I think people think about philosophy. Even though if you watch my channel, then you probably like philosophy, and you probably like listening to me ramble on about things like that. And also, if you do an A-level philosophy with OCI, you'll probably find this video useful, because in the second year you do about verificationism, and you do about things like that, so it'll probably come in useful actually. I'm starting to judge myself a little bit for being extravagant and strange. But that's what people are, so it's okay. And I'm sober, by the way. Probably a little bit tired and probably should go to bed because I've got to be up for work early in the morning. But yes. I love my cat. Can't zoom. She's just sleeping, and she's still black. So she's gonna be black forever. Until she dies, which is gonna be a really sad day for me. Then she might not go black. She might change colours. I don't know what happens to cats when they die. I've never seen a dead cat, and I hope I never will have to. Even though I know that death is a part of life, and I'm not scared of death. I'm not scared of death. Unless I'm extremely sleep deprived and overdosing on caffeine, then I generally have a big existential crisis where I'm like, oh my god, I'm going to die and I'm scared. So that's not often. Like right now, I'm not scared of death. Like I'd like not to die, but I'm not scared. Okay, that's it. That's the end of the video. So if you've enjoyed this rather strange, all over the place video, then leave a thumbs up. And I'm also saying strange and all over the place because that's how I think people have perceived this video. However, it might be coherent. I think it's coherent, it's logical, everything connects up together and it's not like that, but you might perceive it as all over the place, and that's your truth. I just thought of Kierkegaard, which labels negates. No, Kierkegaard said something like, it's not about finding an ultimate truth, it's about finding what's true for you and what's true for me, or something like that, some existential stuff. He was an existentialist, technically. He's like the father of existentialism, whatever that may mean. But he wasn't technically an existentialist because he didn't call himself one, but his philosophy aligns with it. It's like the debate as to whether Karl Marx was actually a Marxist. He didn't call himself a Marxist. People built up a theory around his ideas and it was called Marxism. But was Karl Marx a Marxist? He never called himself a Marxist, but he did align with the Marxist ideology, didn't really? So, yeah. Right, I'm gonna have to stop talking because otherwise I'm gonna just go on forever. Okay. Bye! Thank you for watching.